Thanks to our hosts and to all of you for being here. I hope this is a provocative talk. What I've done is actually written a paper, so this is going to be a bit more on the academic, meaning traditional academic side. What I want to do is open with a basic question that has been circulating a lot of talks around South Asian digital humanities, and that is the transnational potential of DH as a new field formation colonizing the academic world, and are all DHs the same? And this has been a question that's been going around through a lot of different circles, including the global DH group that is part of ADHO. Well, for many years, scholars have engaged in projects and publications that have sought precisely to engage in expanding the limited gamut of digital humanities. This includes studies by Radhika Gajala in 2004 and 2008, Iranian Durish, Pavanelli, so on and so forth. I can give these references later if you'd like to see them. In making a case for digital humanities that is apart from, yet a part of, the hegemonic discourse, there are strong testimonials to the overall insignificance, on the one hand, and utilitarianism of, on the other hand, of DH, as long and far as the question has been answered by academics situated in the West. For some, DH is characterized more by hype than it is by substance. In a widely disseminated piece in the Chronicle of Higher Education, for instance, Timothy Brennan recently opines, quote, "For all its resources, the digital humanities makes a rookie mistake. It confuses more information for more knowledge. The digital humanities ignores a nagging theoretical dilemma. The interpretive problems that computers solve are not the ones that have long stumped critics. On the contrary, the technology demands that it be asked only what it can answer, changing the questions to conform to its own limitations," unquote. Brennan goes on to indict, even typecast, digital humanities as those who give in to, quote, "the fetish of science, neoliberal defunding," quote, and thus becoming traitors to their academic comrades by joining, quote, "the corporate attack on a professoriate that has what they being untenured junior academics, want," unquote. Now, while I would shy away from such sweeping character judgments of junior colleagues, I would concede from the get-go that Brennan's impulse to be wary of a field that claims to intervene in humanistic inquiry with technology is fair. My own cultural studies training and sympathies to Marxist theory cautions against the totalizing impulses of algorithms and the mechanistical reduction of human labor into bits and bytes of data. I appreciate the resistance to reducing scholarship to numbers, assigning use and exchange values to human values, which simply cannot be reduced to lowest common denominators, as if we exist in a binaristic universe. Like the frantic doomsday scenario that was the specter of Y2K in the year 2000, these days DH resembles Plato's Pharmacon as read by Derrida, where writing is both a poison and a remedy. Despite Brennan's widely publicized diss on DH as academic poison, if we want to think of it that way, a vast constituency of digital humanists view DH as a remedy, if we want to think of it that way, for the many shortcomings of academic inquiry, efficiency, and praxis today. In response to Brennan's scathing critique, for instance, came an exuberant celebration of DH in the same publication, actually. In "There is No Such Thing as the Digital Humanities," Eric Weisskott rebuts Brennan's piece in the same publication less than 3 weeks later, in a piece whose tone resembled a battle cry for digital humanities. In the Chronicle of Higher Education, he writes, quote, "Hit pieces on the digital humanities betray deeper tension in the profession, often committed to left politics and conversant in post-structuralist theories of social power. Faculty members and graduate students find themselves employed by megacorporations. Will the megacorporations support the kind of intellectual work that seems most valuable for imagining and realizing a better world?" Weisskott concludes, quote, "The catalog of the things the digital humanities is allegedly ruining turned out to be a catalog of the things humanists value about humanistic inquiry in general. Brennan is right that these are the humanities' reasons to exist. He is wrong to suppose that digitization could cleave humanistic study from them. Print technology didn't kill these things, and neither will digital technology, unquote. By concluding with history as evidence, Weisskopf seems to effectively refute Brennan, but at the end conflates digital technology with digital technology when the two are certainly not the same. Oh, excuse me, that's a typo. I invoke these two recent voices in the current debates on the digital humanities not to agree or disagree with both of their positions, but to point out that these majority opinions exist in a binary wherein many other positions are left out. Many would argue that Brennan and Weisskopf wield an intervening voice due to the intersecting aggregated social privilege accorded to them as straight white male academics who are tenured at major American universities. This critique is undoubtedly a valid one and has been noted by DH scholars, including Melissa Terrace in 2001, Amy Earhart in 2012, and Isabel Galina in 2013. Despite such voices of women digital humanists, the genesis narrative of the formation of DH is unsurprisingly familiar. It begins with the Jesuit priest in Italy named Roberto Bussa, who aspired to create a Goliath index of the complete works of St. Thomas of Aquin in 1946. 2 years later, during a visit to New York City, Bussa personally requested machinist assistance to do so from Thomas Watson, Dr. Thomas Watson, the founder of the International Business Machines Corporation, IBM. Watson consented, and this sparked a literary information revolution that IBM further nurtured in 1953 when the corporation went public with the IBM 701. Father Bussa realized that accounting methods that used the punch card system could also be deployed for tabulating data about words, the frequency, lemmata, index, keywords, etc., and began his own punching and verifying department at the IBM offices in Milan. The result was 1980's Encyclopedic Index Thomisticus, a 56-volume index that used 11 million cards for 70,000 pages. It constitutes the largest printed work ever published and gave birth to computational linguistics. In summing up this milestone in humanities computing, Thomas Winter writes, quote, Father Bussa, with IBM's enabling help, was at the pivot point, or was the pivot point, between handmade scholarly tools and machine-made scholarly tools. His impossible dream of 1949 is the reality of 1999. We may thus here note that in the wake of World War II's devastation, the digital humanities evolves from the decades of a collaboration between Bussa and Watson, who are not dissimilar to Brennan and Weisskopf in terms of access to what could be described as exceptional privilege of producing a certain kind of global knowledge. As we surely know, IBM was profiteering from the nefarious use of its machinated punch card system for a census of Jews initiated by Nazi Germany that would lead to the Holocaust. At the same time, the Father Bussa was ruminating on the juggernaut task of compiling an index of St. Thomas Aquinas' writings. At the end of World War II, the British Raj gave barrister Cyril Radcliffe the massive task of partitioning the so-called jewel in the crown at the twilight of the British Empire. This monumental task was not executed with the help of census punch cards, since using such measures was considerably expensive to the British Empire and later for independent India. Before 1961, officials manually recorded census data while they utilized hand punching machines for the 1971 census. For the 1981 census, key punching machines facilitated data entry. But even had there been such technology available to produce a body of non-Western knowledge, even a fraction of the size of Index Thomisticus, Thomas Babington Macaulay's overtly hostile and racist Minute on Indian Education of 1835 and subsequent ideologies foreclosed upon that very possibility. Legal acts eradicated the so-called greatness of Indian texts and culture and thus justified inferiority while ensuring that less valuable works of Valmiki, Vyasa, Tulsidas, or Tagore could never be canonized. It is thus impossible, I would assert, even to think of the genesis of DH outside of the colonial relations that made its guiding technologies possible. In the case of the Indian subcontinent, the British Raj sequestered Radcliffe away from any potentially influential factions, and he was charged to deal with the difficult task in isolated secrecy of mapping with paper maps a number of regions that were split across two countries and even within them. It is thus in the context of the Genesis narrative of DH, one in which Father Busa and Thomas Watson Sr. loom large, that I propose two opposing heuristics for thinking digital humanities that do not conform neatly to either Brennan's or Weisskott's positions. However, I henceforth want to meditate on how we can expand the realm of identity politics and move beyond reductive questions of man and machine, for it seems to me that even in the divisive polarity that separates the positions of the Brennan team and the Weisskott team, there are other positions to acknowledge and consider on the axis of difference that is shared by both camps. This is where the lack of knowledge production and where it takes place becomes constitutive of the meta-narrative of DH. Indeed, it is fair to reason that, for instance, post-colonial scholars might find this narrative problematic through the heuristics of seminal post-colonial scholars. These include Edward Said, Orientalism, 1978, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak, Three Women's Texts and a Critique of Imperialism, 1985, and Can the Subaltern Speak, 1988. Homi Bhabha, Signs Taken for Wonders, 1985. Dipesh Chakraborty, Provincializing Europe, 2000, and so on and so forth. This representative list in no way encompasses the robust ways in which post-colonial studies can offer a timely and needed critique of dominant trends in DH. Aside from academic post-colonial theory, Shashi Tharoor has recently quite meticulously outlined his rebuttals to the many nostalgic justifications of British colonialism that claim righteousness due to the subcontinent's so-called lack of modernity in his recent book. He points out that India went from being, quote, one of the richest and most industrialized economies of the world, unquote, in 1750 to, quote, one of the poorest, most backward, illiterate, and diseased societies on earth by the time of our independence in 1947, unquote. We return to the Genesis narrative of digital humanities circuitously. The absence of such a narrative suggests that no technological innovation would have led to such a narrative emerging from the subcontinent. The story of DH is an Occidental one that is highly motivated. Rather than the economical, epistemological, and socio-political conditions that would have enabled it were either appropriated or co-opted by the Raj into the process and day of the reprehensible bloodbath of partition in undivided India. The conditions of production to birth such a heuristic, meaning a model of DH in India, is and was not in place as we can currently define it. My goal hereon is to develop from this modest introduction a deceptively novel proposition that no history of DH the world over can be divided from the history of colonialism in general and British colonialism in India in particular. Trumpism, Brexit, and the xenophobic fetishism that so many nations the world have for STEM professionals from India or of the Indian diaspora is jaw-dropping and underscores my former contention. Between the DH critiques of the Brennan camp and the Weisskott camp, I offer a more panoramic view that takes into account those who are left out of the DH Genesis fable and its dominant discourses today. Indeed, as I will argue, hashtag DHPOCO and SADH are arguably the nucleus that positions these two camps on the same campground. That is, a post-colonial reading and modality of DH compels us to recognize the core similarities of both those positions, despite their arguments of being different. My overall contention is that there must be a wider scope of how and why DH began as a discipline that acknowledges the obliteration and suppression of indigenous knowledge systems, and that post-colonial digital humanities and South Asian digital humanities contribute to this widening. Such systems, of course, for all intent and purposes, constitute technological innovation in their own right, even if they do not semantically conform to the situated taxonomy of humanities computing. And I just have a few more minutes, so I'm going to just kind of summarize where I'm going with this. I actually make the distinction between post-colonial digital humanities and South Asian digital humanities. One of those major differences being one could be seen to be a theoretical or socio-political positioning, and the other could be seen to be likened to area studies, or a place, a physical or geographical place where this kind of work takes place in and through its diasporas. So making that distinction, I then, in this paper, go into an argument that attempts to create a narrative for digital humanities in South Asia from the rise of cinema in India and looking at cinema technology. And I think in this sense, my paper is, it strikes a chord with Anandi's presentation from earlier this morning. So that's where I'm going with this, and I can talk about it later. But I wanted to, since we have 4 people here that have created archives that I'm actually citing in this paper, I just wanted to pop these up. And the first is right up here, the Post-Colonial Studies at Emory website, which Deepika put together in 1996. So this has been around for quite a while, and it's been a very important archive for me. In thinking about how to produce different kinds of knowledges that are not West-centric or male-centric or racialized as white, because that is in my view, the central problem of DH discourse. It's very West-centric and it's very white, and it's a serious problem, I think. The Partition Archive, Ganita is here. She put this together, and I think you saw some of this the other day. And this, I think this is really an important archive, again, for giving different voices a chance to be represented to people that might not be able to access them. This is the Kipling Archive, which Amardeep is in charge of. So right here we have 3 different and different seminal archives that try to give us certain representations of knowledge that don't necessarily center DH as a West-based praxis. And finally, I thought it was important to say, well, how did I get into all of this? And Deepa Banerjee is here, and she actually put this together, which was my own entry into being interested in digital culture. It was when my father died, and then he asked me to, he left his collection of over 10,000 art and architecture slides with me. And I went to her, and then one day, I guess in 2007, she said, well, we have money to digitize. And that was the first time I'd heard of it. And I didn't realize at that time that what she was doing and what would come back later was this amazing archive of his work, where 2,000 of those 10,000 slides were digitized. So these are just some examples, and I thought I wanted to just pull these up really briefly because the people that have spearheaded and created these archives are right here in this room with us, and we can chat with them for coffee or tea. And I think asking them questions about these is far more interesting to me than me talking about my paper. But I'm also happy later to talk more about this thing, and get your criticism and anything you want to say about it, because it is going to be turning into a publication. Thank you.